first started following you when you wrote the book, The Energy World is Flat. And what led you, because I'm really trying to understand how individuals like you come at problems that the general zeitgeist seems to have wrong, where how do you attack a problem like that from first principles? Like, what made you go down that path with the first book and then eventually the second book?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that to me it was a very natural process. So we're all in a way, if you're managing risk, you're also an analyst. We are all, analyzing the markets. And I happen to be wired very contrarian. I, also as an engineer, I think about, forces and equilibriums, and it's happened several times where you find effectively situations that are highly unstable equilibriums or meta-stable equilibriums, where things might be in equilibrium, but you know that if they get taken out, then you enter in a totally new regime. And so in that sense, I started developing these views. And as I was managing money, I was talking to people about certain dynamics, and I was always shocked that my views were coming out as so different. In the sense that things that to me were so obvious, like what's happening with shale, or what's happening with the battle for demand supply. And so as you structure your thoughts and your thesis, I found, and that was something that didn't come that naturally to me. I'm an engineer. I'm a formulas guy. But I'm particularly not. I've never been particularly interested in writing per se. It was actually pretty painful for me. So the way we approached this is I was in discussions with my good friend Daniel Lacalle. He had written already some books, and my thesis was very well articulated at the time, already quite deep, and I said, look, Daniel, we talked a lot about energy markets and stuff. I said, I have these views. I think it might be potentially material for a book. And say, wow, yeah, let's do it together. And so I his input and my input and that process was fascinating, because to me, writing a book is a bit like, if I throw you now, 500 pieces of Lego, right, and you put them on top of the table. So the question is, tell me your story, right? Those are your ideas. So for me, writing the book was really about structuring those thoughts. And there are multiple ways in which I can tell you the story. The most obvious for me would be to put all those pieces into colors. So I would go, there's the yellow pieces, the red pieces, the blue. So I would order things by color. And when you do it by color, you realize, oh, there's no green. And then people would, you would wonder why there's no green. And you would dig into that and how it fits. But you could also, let's say, put the pieces into shapes or sizes. So I'm going to put all the big pieces, I'm going to put the shapes. And then you realize that there's no round pieces, or there's no, and as you challenge that model and you go deep, in my case, for example, I was already quite deeply into the book, and it was very structured. And then someone came up and said, okay, because it was a very ambitious book. I mean, historically, if you think about energy books, energy has always been dealt in a very siloed way. So you had fantastic books about oil, you had fantastic books about coal or natural gas or renewables, but there was no real book that would do a cross-section across them and that would effectively apply these forces. And so someone came up and said, how about renewables? And my answer was like, exactly, how about renewables? And it was basically testing the thesis. And what was extraordinary is that how it fit perfectly and how it actually reinforced this. It would be a little bit like, Mendeleev, laying out the table of the periodic elements and predicting that there must be an element with an atomic weight of X. And you put the model first, and then someone makes the discovery and it fits, and you're like, oh my God. And that's the feeling I had, when we did this. So by the time I finished writing the book, I knew way more than I did when I started, and I found that process so powerful. And I recommend everybody that they write their thoughts, because it's that process of structuring your thoughts, challenging the thesis, and everything will help you either knock it down, in which case you were wrong to start with, or reinforce it. And that was just fascinating for me. So later on, things happened again. I mean, we had negative interest rates, and I was like, really?
So this is the book was 2014 when you wrote the first book.
Correct.
And then 2009 when you saw the negative interest rate environment.
No, this happened later, 2017. I published, but I started writing earlier. I mean, it was sort of 2015, 16 when, these books take a long time. I mean, the energy book was about a year of just, but these ideas evolved throughout years. In the case of the second book, the anti-bubbles, there's also, I would argue, a catchy element of how you want to present this. So the first book was very much inspired. If you look at the title, "The Energy World is Flat," it was very much inspired by Friedman's "The World is Flat," and that book was just fascinating because I remember reading it. It must have been 2003, or shortly after the dot-com bust, and it was a fascinating time because those of us who lived this in first person, we were left with a very bitter feeling after the bubble. And his perspective was so incredible because he was basically saying, look, we have this game changer technology. It attracts all this capital, all this investment, wires the oceans with things like broadband. And then overcapacity eventually creates this bubble to burst. And then the miracle happens because you have a game changer technology in ginormous size for free. And I remember that sort of click in my head to say, wow, how something as bad as the dot-com or the feeling that you had of, this bitter feeling of the bubble and the consequences, suddenly it opened this world of all the possibilities. It was, and I remember that. And so when Fukushima happened, I had that moment where you realize that you had a game changer technology in the US in the form of shale, fracking and horizontal drilling, which was a true game changer. But natural gas, which had been historically a very regional fragmented commodity, because as a gas, you needed either the pipes or the infrastructure through LNG. And so you had a very fragmented market. And then when Fukushima happened, and it sent, Japan shut all nuclear overnight, they were forced to effectively burn something else to keep the lights on. And that meant they had to get their hands on anything, including, coal or natural gas or even oil. And what happened is as Japan soaked all this LNG, you created this situation that was the equivalent of the dot-com. You had, effectively a lot of natural gas at $2 a MMBTU, like $12 a barrel equivalent of oil. And then you had Japan paying 10 times that for a very long period of time. And so this was like a major call on the market where you saw Australia saying, wait a minute, I have all this natural gas stranded. With this sort of prices, I can build all the infrastructure. And effectively what happened is you had exactly the same call that we had in the dot-com, where everybody that was building this broadband was obviously doing it because they thought they were the only guys doing it and that they would make millions from it. And this is very common, and everybody thinks they're the only guys building LNG. So what became very clear to me is like, look, within 3 years, you're going to have this wall of natural gas. You're going to have this thing, the situation in Japan improving, so demand goes down. You have this wall of supply with this game changer technology, and you're going to have natural gas trading globally converging at the lower end, and for the first time in history being effectively a global commodity that trades. And that's why where I coined the term of energy broadband. LNG became like the energy broadband because we literally wired the oceans with LNG, where historically you had to make a 10 billion investment to go from point A to B on a take or pay basis. So now you had effectively, it was like a market with exact number of male and female. There was no market. Then you had suddenly lots of people that were like Qatar and others. So what happened is, as the market developed, you had for the first time abundant, reliable, cheap, clean natural gas, and it became very obvious to me that natural gas would compete with oil as in transportation, whether it's tankers or others. And this dynamic of oil having competition, which is led to many other thoughts and concepts. The success of OPEC historically has always been, look, I control the oil, therefore I control the price. Mm-hmm. This is the theory said that OPEC's success was driven by an oligopoly of supply, right? The reality is there's lots of oligopolies that have not succeeded. The reality is that they had a monopoly of demand. The real reason why Saudi and OPEC was successful is they had a monopoly over transportation demand. What it means is we drive our cars with gasoline, diesel, our trains, our boats, or planes. It's all oil products. So the real reason they could keep a strong grasp is because they had a monopoly of transportation demand. And this was challenging that. And I use the example, I took a wild bet, not so wild to me, but anyway, when Warren Buffett bought the railway company in the US, it was an oil trade. I said, guys, this is an oil trade. He bought this thing where he's paying $150 a barrel for diesel. Bear in mind that the trains are the second largest consumer of oil in North America, behind the the military. Yeah, like single client, right? They were all running on diesel, and suddenly you have trains that are paying $150 a barrel for diesel that you can turn into natural gas for $12 a barrel equivalent in your size, equally clean, more reliable. You don't need to worry about Middle East and whatever. Of course, you're going to do it, but you're going to do it quietly. You're not going to go and say, by the way, so I'm going to change everything. The margins stay there. So for me, Warren Buffett, who's we don't need to talk about how smart he is. To me, it was an oil trade. I said, of course he's doing that because he's going to change his trains from diesel to nat gas, and that's what he should do. And I think in some way that's what he did. And so effectively, it's fascinating how I guess my brain connects things, and that connection became very clear. It helped us coin stuff, but yeah, it was fascinating.